Thank you, Gabriella. Do you remember what it was like to get home from a long trip when you were a kid? For me, even if it was a good trip, nothing felt right until I was home. We took a lot of road trips to the Carolinas to visit our family, and that is a long drive for a couple of young kids. After 2 or 3 days of just driving, when our minivan finally pulled into our driveway, my brother and I would spill out of the back seat and go running around to see our house. My first stop was the vegetable garden. I just had to see what had changed in the past 2 weeks that we'd been gone. Mom, Dad, the cucumbers got huge. There are 14 new cherry tomatoes on our cherry tomato plant. And then I'd run upstairs and see my room. It was just how I left it, in a tornado of clothes that didn't make it into my suitcase. And I'd jump onto the bed just to make sure it felt right. And it did. Now, my parents were happy to be home, but they were also tired from driving, and they didn't express quite the same enthusiasm as they dragged all our luggage back into the house. They're thinking about papers to catch up on, laundry to do, work waiting for them. It is always good to come home, but there's still a lot to do, and that tempers some of the excitement. Now that I'm an adult, I get it. Coming home from a long trip makes me say things like, I need a vacation from my vacation. And then I trudge into the 162 emails waiting for me. Our elementary school classes just finished spending the month of September on Nehemiah. So they know all about what happened to God's people during the exile. They were taken far away from their home, and their home city of Jerusalem was totally destroyed. But we also know about the excitement of the exiled people when they finally got to come home and rebuild Jerusalem. That's where we get Psalm 126. A psalm like this one is a psalm of ascents, for going up. It's one you would literally pray or sing as you hiked up to Jerusalem. And in March, I got the opportunity to find out the hard way that that is a lot of uphill hiking. This psalm was written to tell the awesome story of what God had done for his people and to ask him to continue to do things to help them in the future. In the psalmist's time, what God had just done was to gather his people home. Now, this was not home after a long road trip. This was home after 70 years, a lifetime. Home that so many of them had never even seen with their own eyes. They were able to return to Jerusalem. Their fortunes, their people who had been captured, were restored. When they said, our mouths were filled with praise, our tongues with songs of joy, they were not talking about the quiet relief of getting home after a trip. It's a lot closer to the kids running up and down the stairs going, we're home, we're home. But as we get older, this concept of unbridled praise gets a little harder for us to grasp. We're embarrassed when we receive praise. We give praise to the wrong things, to stuff, to status. We don't always know how to give it to God. I say this out loud because I need to hear it too. We overthink this relationship, intellectualize it. We reduce our conversations with God to, thank you for this, help me with that. And we don't always step back and just say, God, you are awesome. We're certainly not comfortable shouting about it with our outside voices. I like the Psalms for this reason. They show pictures of real human emotion and give us words to pray when we don't know how to express what we feel. In this psalm, the words are joyful and full of praise. When writing about the Psalms, Philip Yancey said, to develop praise, I have found it helps to hang around children. They have no problem bursting out into spontaneous praise when something impresses them. We can say that, well, that's easy for a child, but I'm an adult. We have social structures and rules, and I certainly don't want my behavior to make anyone uncomfortable or call attention to myself. But let's remember what Jesus told the disciples in this morning's reading from the Gospel of Mark. This was in the midst of a busy day, and Jesus had been talking about some pretty heavy topics on the laws of marriage, not kid stuff. So what were we going to do when a huge crowd of children comes moving towards Jesus and their parents aren't stopping them? Their parents are bringing them. Jesus did not thank the disciples for being his bodyguards. In fact, he was indignant with them for interrupting his time with the children. Jesus said that the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. We need to be more like them if we're going to make it in. But what was he looking for? What does it mean to become like a child entering the kingdom? Is it the trust that children have, knowing they depend on someone else? Is it the honesty children express? We know children will tell it like it is, or tell you when you have a tag sticking off of your sweater halfway through Sunday morning. These are a huge part of it, but these are ones we can live with. Yes, I can depend on God for my salvation. Yes, I should be honest with myself and honest with others. I could write a whole sermon on these points, and we could say a lot about the idea that Jesus is too busy or too important for kids. But what I see here is how effortlessly and naturally children teach us to react like the people who wrote this psalm. Children know how to praise. Truly praising God isn't about what people think about us. Praise isn't about pretension or propriety. It's about shouts of laughter and songs of joy. Have you ever had a preschooler tell you about a snail they found in the driveway like it is the greatest day of their lives? Children can praise. What would it look like if we praised God like that? Tell what he's done for us with unself-conscious noise. To say, we're not worried about what others think about us. In fact, because we are praising him, what others think about us, according to verse 2, is the Lord has done great things for them. The Lord has done great things for us. What has the Lord done? He created this land we're standing on and he put us in it. God delivered his people out of bondage. He made a way in the desert. He remained faithful even when we did not. He pulled his children back from exile. He came down here and showed us what it meant to love not just our friends, not just our families or people we want to impress. He showed us how to love the orphan and the widow and the stranger, the unfair business leader or the woman that people whisper about. He showed us how to humbly serve. And he showed us how God triumphs over evil and death when he saw human sin do its worst and he did not let it win. He continues to show up year after year, leading us out of our own situations of bondage and inspiring us to continue. The exiles had every reason to be cynical. People were born and lived and died without ever seeing their homeland. After 70 years away, the Lord gathered them home again. But like Nehemiah and company knew, when they got back to Jerusalem, the hard part was not over. They had a city to rebuild. They had fields to sow and harvest. They had enemies. They had dried up riverbeds that hadn't filled up with water yet. But they also expected God to show up. They didn't say, thanks God, but now what? They did thank God. But then they were like those who dreamed. They turned their eyes toward a better future with God. Young children expect to encounter the divine. Magic and mystery and happily ever after are not silly to them at all. Every week, I hear stories about amazing things they want to do. They soak up our Bible stories, and they would not be surprised at all if the things that happen to the people in the Bible happen to them. Like the returning exiles, they see what's happened in the past, and they see no reason why it won't continue to get better. And with God on their side, do not try to tell them that anything is impossible. When I was younger, I did not read well. It took me way longer than my peers to learn how to read. But I just knew that when I grew up, I was going to be a good reader and I would go to college. And God put the people in my way. My parents, my teachers, who made sure I got there. Of course, I also thought when I grew up I'd be tall, but not everything is in God's will. But at some point, we stopped saying when I grow up, and we decide that our dreams are too big, or too far away. Or we could be like those who returned to find Jerusalem in ruins, think it's too big a job. Or we could be like those who dreamed, who saw that God had gotten them this far, so God would continue to take them further. There may have been pain and tears in their building and in their planting, but there is great joy in that harvest. We all have to deal with pain. Adults do, kids do. We have heavy on our hearts today the Tree of Life Synagogue in Pittsburgh. I've got friends who are going through some really, really hard things right now, and I know some of y'all are too. You may feel like it is year 65 of the exile and there is no end in sight. But hope is so central to our faith. Look at the optimism of a child who can still dream that there's something great coming. Or the psalmist who celebrated that although the streams in the Negev's desert land weren't full of life-giving water yet, they were going to do their planting because they knew God would bring the rain. Let's remember how to dream like a child. Know that what God has in your future is much, much bigger than what you can see right now, and get excited about how He's going to show up in your life as you seek Him. Remember how far He's carried all of us, and don't limit what He can do, where He can take us next. Let's remember how to praise like a child. Let your mouth be filled with laughter and your tongue with songs of joy. When you enter the presence of God, let's run to God like we're 6 years old running to hug Grandma at the airport. Go like that crowd of children headed towards Jesus, and know that no matter who you are, He wants you there. Amen.